Greetings, this is Eat Fat Grow Slim. I thought I'd do a little series about the typical sort of blood tests we're all getting these days. But I think there's one sort of overarchingly important blood test, and it's all to do with diabetes or your chance of getting it. The Western world, probably 80% of people are now metabolically unhealthy. That means either obese, pre-diabetic, or some other thing like fatty liver disease, obesity, and so on. There's very few really healthy people out there, and it's all to do with the fact that we're eating a diet which is quite harmful to us. Agricultural products and, of course, processed foods. And the biggest measure of this, used by doctors, is called the HbA1c test. Okay, and what I'm going to do is explain what this is for. And when you see your test come back from the lab, and your doctor says you're okay, I want you to be able to ask a question and understand what the answer is. And I think the big problem is these metabolic problems can develop silently for years, and you can be forewarned, because the sooner you understand what is happening, the better your chances of doing something about it. And your old doc will have a kind of number where you're still not diabetic or still not pre-diabetic. Unfortunately, you may still be on the road to that problem. So blood tests can tell us an enormous amount about what's going inside your body, but where the danger is with blood tests, we can become so focused on just that number that we forget what the number is actually trying to tell us. So today, let's have a look at this HbA1c. You may know it as your glycated hemoglobin test. This is an extraordinarily useful test, but it's also a test that can sometimes be a little bit misleading. So what is the A1C? It's otherwise known as an A1C test. Now, inside every red blood cell is a protein called hemoglobin, and you might remember that from school. It's essential to life because it carries oxygen from the lungs to the tissues of the body and helps transport carbon dioxide back towards the lungs. So red blood cells circulate through the bloodstream for approximately 4 months. About 120 days on average, and while they're circulating, glucose in your bloodstream can attach itself to the protein, including hemoglobin. This is called glycation. Now, actually, for hemoglobin, it does have a slight impairment effect, but it doesn't actually hurt the red blood cell's ability to carry oxygen and carbon dioxide. Not very, only by a marginal amount, but that's not what's the issue here. What's the issue is the more glucose there is in your blood, and the longer a red blood cell remains in circulation, the greater the opportunity for glucose to attach itself to hemoglobin, and that's a sort of measure. So when we measure A1C, we are measuring this proportion of hemoglobin that has become glycated. This gives us an indirect indication of how much glucose your blood has been exposed to over the preceding 2 or 3 months. Now, as we all know, too much glucose can lead to too much insulin. It can lead to too much insulin resistance, can lead to metabolic syndrome, can lead to pre-diabetes, can lead to diabetes, and so on. So it's really good because this gives us a forewarning of how much, on a sort of average calculation, if you've been having too much glucose, or maybe a perfect amount, a wonderful amount. So notice this word, it's an indirect measurement. It's not exactly the same as a continuous glucose monitor that shows all the ups and downs, but it's a wonderful way of averaging it out, and it's not a direct measurement, not a precise measurement in that sense, but it is a historical record of your average glucose exposure. But the test is influenced by more than just glucose, and this is something you really have to understand. Red blood cells do not all survive for exactly the same length of time. and it varies from person to person. If they are being destroyed more quickly than usual, there is less time for the glucose to attach itself to the hemoglobin, and the A1C number may appear lower than expected. Okay, if they remain in circulation for longer, the result may be higher. Okay, there are some other problems with the test. Okay, so this is a typical target levels for HbA1c, with normal over here and diabetes over here. You will see that there are two sets of numbers, one's for the UK and one's for the US. In the United Kingdom, the A1C is usually reported in millimoles per mole, and a level below 42 is generally regarded as being below the pre-diabetes range. From 42, actually this one says 43, so above 42 to 47, generally regarded as increased risk, often called pre-diabetes, and anything over 48 in this region is a diagnostic threshold for diabetes. So if you're anywhere in the high 40s, I think your doctor is going to take a look at you seriously and do some other tests to determine whether you're you've actually got diabetes. Okay, in the US, the numbers are calculated in percentage terms, and those figures are approximately below 6%, the usual pre-diabetes threshold, 6% to 6.4% in the pre-diabetes range, and anything above 6.5 or above is the diagnostic threshold for diabetes itself. Now, these are only thresholds. They're not magical points at which a person suddenly changes from healthy to diabetic. But I think in a busy GP surgery, if the numbers are low enough, your doc's maybe not going to worry about them. But actually, as the numbers creep up, they can be very useful. Okay, so obviously biology is not as simple as just these simple thresholds. And a diagnosis of diabetes should generally be confirmed with appropriate testing, particularly if the result is unexpected or there are no obvious symptoms. But the numbers kind of matter, but the direction of travel matters actually more. So even if you've got an unusually low HbA1c or an unusually high HbA1c, what matters is the test you took, the difference between the test you took a few months ago and the test you're taking today. Even if your number is on the low side, if your older number is lower than your newer number, it means you've been eating the wrong things, and it means you've been exposing yourself to a great amount of glucose. So, for example, let's imagine that your HbA1c was 30, or what would that be? That would be something like 5% in American terms 3 months ago, but now it's gone up to 40. You are still below the threshold of pre-diabetes, but your A1C has risen substantially, and that means you've been hitting the cakes and the soda and the sugary stuff. The obvious answer here, if you want to keep your numbers in a healthy range, you want to avoid being pre-diabetic or getting pre-diabetic symptoms, or you want to avoid being diabetic at all, and of course here we're talking about type 2 diabetes for all of this, the obvious answer is to reduce your average exposure to glucose. And that means looking carefully at what you eat. I'm so sorry, but it's the crisps and the potatoes and the chips and all that lovely highly processed food that can be particularly problematic, because they often contain the largest amount of rapidly digestible starches and sugars. And starch is probably the worst in some ways, because you don't think you're eating something naughty, you're just overloading with glucose, which is rapidly digested. And the food does not have to taste sweet, and so the food does not have to taste sweet to raise your glucose. So these refined starches can be broken down so quickly into glucose. So there's these two types of starches. You might have heard of resistant starches, and they're in long chains, and so you do get some protection with those. But there's these branch chain starches which just get digested so quickly, and you will overload your system with glucose even more than a sweet drink if you eat something like white bread. So white bread, many breakfast cereals, really the worst thing. Cakes, biscuits, sweets, sugary drinks, many other ultra processed foods can all contribute to repeated elevations in blood glucose, which damage your hemoglobin and put up that HbA1c number. If this happens day after day, the average exposure can gradually rise. Reducing refined carbohydrates and added sugars can therefore reduce the amount of glucose entering the bloodstream. Remember, there are essential amino acids or proteins. There are essential fats or fatty acids, but there is zero essential carbohydrates. The wonderful thing about the human body is that your liver can make all the glucose you need, exactly the right amount, exactly the right time, when you need it, and exactly the right level. If you don't eat any carbohydrates at all, your liver will make sure your blood glucose level is at a perfect level. Now, here's the big one, of course. I'm going to say this: fasting can help in a different way, in a really good way. When you stop eating completely, you stop repeatedly adding new nutrients and blood glucose into the bloodstream. Insulin levels fall. Your body can begin to use stored energy, and depending on the individual and the duration of the fast, glucose regulation is going to improve. Fasting is a magic bullet in this sense, but obviously it's not for everyone. So obviously, there are situations in your life where it's going to be very difficult to fast, but everyone can fast a bit, even if it means just eating your evening meal earlier or waiting a bit before you eat breakfast to extend that nighttime fasting period. Okay, let me just recap. A1C, that's what you'll call it. Some people call it the HbA1c, and it's the hemoglobin glycation test. Shows you how much you're punishing your body with too much glucose in your blood. It's a very useful number. It's an important number, but it's not actually a disease itself. It's not a measure of disease. It's a marker. You can have a very high one, you can have a very low one, and you can be perfectly healthy. But for most of us, if your A1C is going up, you're in trouble. If it's going down, that's all good. Okay, a final word before I was waffling on a bit there. I'm just going to say, if you get diagnosed as late stage pre-diabetes or actually into diabetes, you may be offered drugs as a first step. Metformin is a big one, and also these GLP-1 agonists such as Wegovy and Ozempic, which are now being diagnosed quite freely for this condition. I'm going to say, ask your doctor about David Unwin. Okay, if you're in the UK, there's lots of doctors out there in the US as well that are doing this, and they are reversing diabetes through diet. Simple changes in your diet, understanding how much sugar is equivalent to a slice of white bread, all those little things. Maybe a CGM monitor will help as well. But there's some amazing things going out there, and not all your doctors, your busy overworked doctors, are aware of what's going on. So give it a try first before you sort of become a drug addict. Okay, that's all I've got to say about this. I hope it's useful. Put some comments in the old box. Hopefully I'll be able to answer your comments, and have a good one. and keep off the sugar. Yeah.